On June 23, 1944, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, about 870. It is 100 nautical miles west of the Cape Verde Islands. General Uno Kameo stood in for the small control room of the huge Japanese cargo submarine I-52. It was bringing 2 tons of gold, 120 tons of tin, and valuable war supplies. France was invaded by the Germans. He saw the German U-530 through his periscope. After moving radar equipment and 2 techs sneak off into the darkness. The meeting was over. Smoothly. Soon, his submarine would come to the surface to start the 15-knot night run towards Europe. It looked like everything was fine. In just 3 hours, Commander Kameo and the crew of 94 would be dead. They were hurt by a device they didn't know existed. The American planes flying above would record the sounds of their submarine breaking apart on wire loops, using gadgets that float on the surface of the water to listen. These sonobuoys fell from an Avenger. The torpedo bomber would send the Tu-52's death blows to people miles above. Not only did it destroy one submarine, but it also destroyed the Japanese Navy's faith in itself. The ocean, which used to be Japan's way to expand its kingdom, was now an American spy grid where nothing could get through. Hide. The math behind this difference in technology was already being done on the other side of the Pacific. There were numbers that would blow Japanese submariners' minds about their abilities and goal, and how likely they are to live. From 1941 to 1945, there would be 5.3 million deaths when American subs sank 1,314 Japanese ships. Tons, which is 56% of all the money that Japanese merchants lost. Even though Japanese subs were very big and had a lot of advanced technology, they could only sink 184 Allied ships, adding up to 1 million tons. The difference wasn't just a matter of numbers. It marked a major difference in how 2 countries dealt with war at sea, industrial production, and new developments in technology. Japan built the biggest submarines in the world, submarines that could. America built sonar devices that can carry planes and go around the world. That was many miles away and could hear them. As Japanese experts worked on, American companies made beautiful ships like sonobuoys, FM sonar, and acoustic torpedoes and radar devices that were faster than Japan could think of ways to defend itself. The steps. The change wouldn't start with one big event, but 3. Through thousands of battles, Japanese submariners slowly came to realize they were being chased by forces being watched by devices they didn't understand, and being killed off one by one. A mechanical machine of an unimaginable size. Lieutenant Commander Nukio Nambu, who was in charge of I-401, later told American interrogators after his arrest that he was on one of Japan's huge submarine aircraft carriers. Surrender in August 1945, that was the first time he knew Japan had lost the war. War broke out not because of a fight, but because they heard American radio traffic while they were on patrol. The easygoing speed, the huge number of resources that are talked about in everyday conversations, the sheer number of coordinated activities across thousands of miles of water, all of which showed Japan's strengths it couldn't match. But for a lot of Japanese, for submariners, the realization came from direct and scary experiences with American anti-submarine warfare. Digital tools. The survivors were left shocked and demoralized by their experiences. This is not the story of how Japanese submarine sailors learned that American technology was better. There were exciting fights and brave last stands. As the story goes on, more and more is revealed, of slowly learning and of technological shocks so great that it turned warriors who were sure of themselves into men who knew their cause was lost a long time before their country gave up. The Japanese submarine army that joined the war in December 1941 was one of the best in the world. Japan had about 70 ships that could go to sea. Many subs are designed in completely new ways. The subs of the IRI 400 class. It was 400 feet long, and, until nuclear-powered ships came along in the 1960s, the biggest ship in the world. Pushed 5,900 tons under the water. They had room for 3 ICM-6 A1 Submarine. Float plane bombs in a watertight hangar, launch them with a catapult, and they should be able to hit targets as far away as possible, like the Panama Canal or New York City. Each I-400 class submarine had enough on board. Enough fuel to go around the world 15 times without stopping, going 37,500 miles. It took 14 knots to go nautical miles, and the tech was amazing. These submarines had special trim systems for staying in place underwater and demagnetizing, wires to keep magnetic mines, air search radar, and a nuke coverings made to soak up sonar waves. Japanese submarines that were smaller were just as amazing. Type C cargo subs like the I-52 could go 21,000 miles of water, carrying important military supplies between Japan and its partners. There were fast attack submarines in the Pacific that used torpedoes with long range and had amazing underwater skills. Japanese submariners got a lot of training, practiced being stealthy, and knew how to use their boats quite closely. A lot of them had years of training. Captain Tatsunosuke Ariazumi was one of Japan's best and would lead submarine activities near the end of the war. Tacticians who work underwater. His teams were well-trained, skilled, and sure of themselves. They had good reason to be sure. In the first few months of the war, Japanese subs were successful in the attack on Pearl Harbor, scouted out American positions, helped the fleet, and looked for friendly warships. The policy stressed supporting the fleet, keeping Japanese naval assets safe, spying, and attacking military targets with a high V value. Japanese submarines were not like American submarines, which were mostly used for stealing goods. Submarines were mostly used for defensive actions against enemy warships. This choice about strategy would end up being disastrous. While Japanese submarines went after American aircraft ships, Japan's war economy was kept going by the commercial fleet, which was being destroyed by submarines. Read more. Importantly, this focus on tactics meant that Japanese submariners ran into American weapons that fight submarines, mostly in the most dangerous situations, when American naval troops were on high alert and well protected. The Japanese people first met Sonobo in 1944 after American industry had made the technology better. Sonobuoys looked like very simple gadgets. They were small. Electric sonars that could be dropped from planes and float on the water's surface would listen for sending sounds from the submarine to the planes above via radio. They were first made by the British in 1944 under the code name High, adopted and made better by American troops. It had a revolutionary effect. In the past, an airplane trying to find a submarine had to stay in visual touch or use radar, which only worked when the submarine came to the top. Once a submarine went under the water, planes couldn't see it anymore. Sonobuoys changed everything. A plane could drop a design of 5 purple sonospheres, orange, blue, red, and yellow, making a grid for hearing underwater. Each buoy would be watched by an aeroplane, which would listen for sounds made by underwater propellers, machinery, or movement. Because the system worked so well, it was made standard on anti-submarine planes. All through 1944 and 1945, Chief of Staff Uno Kameo and the crew of at 11:40 p.m., I-52, the first signs that something was wrong came in. In June 23, 1944, the home of Lieutenant Commander Jesse D. Taylor, the Avenger torpedo bomber, which was fired from the USS Bogue, found I-52 on radar while she was running on the ground. Taylor fired lights at the huge submarine, which lit it up and then attacked with depth charges as I-52 went into a crash. The first strike almost didn't work. As the submarine went down, there were blasts all around it. What happened next changed the way anti-submarine fighting was done. He threw a purple sonobuoy into the water. Within seconds, his radio operator heard the clear sound of submarine blades sent from the device that floats. Under the water, Taylor could find I-52. He was able to guess her movements and set up his plane for the killing blow by following her avoidance moves. They threw a Mark 24 mine, codenamed Foe, which was a sonar torpedo that locked onto the noise of the propellers on I-52 and followed it non-stop until it hit. There was a blast and the sound of the hull being recorded by sonobuoys getting broken. The crew of Commander Taylor said they heard cracking and crunching sounds. It sounds like a tin can is being crushed. I-52 sank to the bottom of the ocean, 17,000 feet. Captain Kameo, 94 crew members, 14 guests, and 2 Germans were on board. To their deaths as techs. The records of Sonobuoy were found in the Archive of the Nation. Gordon wire number 1 and Gordon wire number 2 are written on thin wire loops. Wire number 2, which recorded the last moments of a submarine crew that never found out what technology killed them. The sinking of the I-52 showed skills that made Japanese submariners very scared when details came out. By way of spy networks, American planes could find subs in the water. What this meant was, it's shocking. When a Japanese submarine dove to get away from an airplane, it wasn't really getting away. It was just that. They hide from people who can see them, but can still be seen by sound sensors. American groups that kill hunters focus on escort ships like the USS Bogue and radar sonobuoys and acoustic torpedoes into unified systems that changed hunting submarines from a random meeting to a planned activity. Thorough getting rid of. The task group of the USS Bogue sank 13 ships on its own. Submarines from Germany and Japan between February 1943 and July 1945. Using these methods over and over, Japanese submariners began to report strange things happening to them. Planes would make impossible-to-miss shapes appear over dive positions. Even so, depth charges would fall in exact patterns. Submarine being hundreds of feet deep. Torpedoes would follow evasive maneuvers as if led by invisible hands. They were being hunted by technologies their own navy hadn't launched, couldn't counter, and barely understood. The psychological effects got worse during Operation Barney in June 1945, when 9 American submarines with FM sonar got into the Sea of Japan by going through highly mined straits that Japanese planners thought it would be impossible to attack. Japan was meant to feel safe in the Sea of Japan. In the Tsushima Strait, for lines of underwater bombs keep the area safe. From Japan, people thought that submarines couldn't get through the minefields, so merchant ships could go there easily. The FM sonar, which was made to find things underwater, sent out American submariners gave the sound a unique name, Hell's Bells, when mines were found. The new technology allowed submarines to make maps of whole minefields, find safe routes, and get around obstacles. Japanese experts thought that any underwater approach would be stopped. On June 4, 1945, Sea Dog, Creel, and Spadefish were the first 3 subs to enter Tsushima. Strait went under, and their FM sonar painted pictures of the mines on screens. The alarm bells always sounded as they moved between mines that were sometimes only 50 yards apart. It had been 20 hours underwater when all 3 subs came out of the water safely into the Sea of Japan. After that, 2 more groups. Within days, 9 American submarines were freely working in waters that Japan had thought were off-limits. Safety. It was amazing to go shooting. From June 9th to June 24th, 1945, the 9 subs sank a total of 28 Japanese ships, killing 54,786 people. Tons, with a warship and a submarine on board. They was free to do what they wanted, rising at night to charge batteries and diving during the day to attack ships that thought they were safe from attacks from below. Danger. The Japanese Naval Command was shocked. Reports on intelligence started coming in, talking about strikes by submarines in the Sea of Japan. Survivors said they saw American subs working freely. Attack whenever you want, easy to get away from. It was a huge blow to their mental health. If American subs were able to, they could get through the most heavily guarded seas if they had technology that could get them through minefields that had been put down for years, then no place was safe. The ocean had turned into enemy country. Japanese submarine commanders who worked in these seas knew what it meant. Right away, they were being chased by groups that had technology that Japan couldn't match. Every patrol turned into a test of survival rather than fighting skill. The gap in technology went far beyond radar. The American subs had. There were radars that could pick up surface contacts from more than 20 miles away when conditions were good. Submarines from Japan didn't get radar until June 1944, and even then, they only got a small amount, with performance that is worse than American methods. American subs were in mind, could find Japanese ships long before they were found by other ships, and they could track targets from above. Range, could get ready for attacks with knowledge that Japanese commanders didn't have and couldn't stop. American submarines also gained from ultra-intelligence, the operation that broke codes and decrypted Japanese naval. Talking to people, the Americans knew when the Japanese submarines were going to prowl. Areas, supply lines, and plans for operations, often before Japanese submarines arrived. They got their orders. Together with better radar and sonar, this meant They were working in an ocean where the enemy knew where they were going, and what they were doing. Tech could keep track of them as they got there. Lieutenant Commander Nukio Nambu, who was in charge of I-401. Later, they told American interrogators that they felt like they were being watched and tracked all the time and were never safe. No matter how deep the water is, there was a reason for the anxiety. It was an accurate picture of truth. The difference in wages showed up in different ways. That shocked Japanese submariners who lived long enough to see American bases after they gave up. During the war, Japan had a hard time keeping its 70 submarines in service, but the U.S. built 314 subs. From 1941 to 1945, replacing deaths faster than battle could do them harm. Japanese planners thought it was impossible for American factories to make submarines at the rates they were. Some of them are the Mayer Island Naval Shipyard in California, the Electric Boat Company in Connecticut, and the Port South Naval Shipyard in. Japanese subs were launched from bases in New Hampshire and other places around the clock. Yards couldn't get close. The subs themselves showed that Japan had industrial skills that went beyond Japan. To understand, Gato and Balao-class submarines from the United States are smaller than. Japanese giants were built with standard parts that were made in dozens of workshops. Trucks, battery packs, torpedoes, periscopes, and sonar equipment all came from different sources. Facilities and got to assembly yards in exactly timed streams. A single Gato-class submarine needed about 140,000 parts to be made by people working for companies in 32 states. There were no breaks in the supply line. When subs needed to be fixed, spare parts were ready right away. When submarines were lost, new ones got there within months. When Japanese subs were damaged in battle, they often had to wait weeks or months for repairs. To a lack of parts, overloading in maintenance facilities, and industry bottlenecks that the American troops never had. The torpedo situation showed the gap between technology and industry. At the start of the war, American subs used the broken Mark 14 torpedo as a weapon, had issues with depth control, magnetic exploders not working, and contact detonators not working. For almost 2 years, American submariners fought with weapons that often didn't go off or were set at the wrong depths, so they didn't do any good. Below the goals, this could have been Japan's chance to take advantage of the United States' weakness. Instead, it was the American submariners who found the problems, tested them, and put fixes in place. Even though the Bureau of Ordnance was against it, by September 1943, the Mark 114's problems were fixed. At the same time, the electric Mark 18 torpedo came in. Service that doesn't leave any trace, so targets don't know when an attack is coming. The Mark 24 mine, which is actually a secret name for an acoustic homing torpedo, could be dropped from an aeroplane and would follow the sounds of the submarine's propellers until they hit the ground. The Japanese military never made guns that were the same. Japanese torpedoes were usually effective, but they didn't offer any. Technology has many benefits. Even worse, Japanese factories couldn't make them in enough quantity to be useful. American goods. On patrol, American subs had 24 torpedoes with them. They were free to fire them because they knew they would get more. Japanese subs didn't carry as many rockets and had to fire them cautiously because they weren't easy to get. When you add up all of these technological and industrial benefits, you get a mathematical certainty that Japanese submariners learn over time. Every check, every meeting, and the lesson was reinforced by the fact that they almost got caught by American anti-submarine troops. American owned the ocean. Right now, in 1944, American subs sank an average of 1 Japanese ship every day. That year was the height of their effort. In just that 1 year, 492 Japanese merchant submarines sank ships weighing a total of 2,387,780 tons. Threats. Japanese submarine builders couldn't build enough to replace the ships that were lost. In 1941, Japan's commercial marine could hold about 6 million tons. By 1945, it could only hold 2 million tons. August 1945, with only 320,000 tons ready to carry goods. The loss of Japanese ships wasn't just a military issue. It stood for the deliberate suffocation of Japan's the war economy. Southeast Asian rice couldn't get to places in Japan. Wool from the Dutch East Indies were unable to reach factories in Japan. Rubber, tin, tungsten, and everything else. Japan had to keep fighting, but they were stuck in overseas areas while American submarines patrolled the sea lanes. By 1945, American subs were going through trouble finding targets big enough to justify spending money on torpedoes. The Japanese merchant fleet was almost completely gone. What few ships were left were hugged coastlines, used narrow passageways where it was dangerous for submarines to operate, or they stayed in town instead of taking the risky trip. Japanese members of the cabinet would later tell the Diet that the loss of ships was the main reason for the defeat, while recognizing that American subs played a role, did more to help win the war than any other single-weapon system. 4. Japanese submariners who lived through the war and saw American actions for themselves after Japan gave up. The discoveries about technology were terrible. Captain Arizumi, who came up with the I-400, as part of Japan's submarine program and as one of its most experienced submarine officers, killed themselves on I-401 rather than face defeat. He knew what it was. A lot of Japanese Navy officers were starting to agree. Japan had gone up against an economic power whose the level of technology was beyond what Japanese managers had imagined. When I-401 and I-40, they gave up in August 1945, leaving behind huge submarine aircraft ships. When American soldiers got on board, they were shocked by how big they were. These subs were longer than American ones. Destroyers could move more tons than any other ship in the American submarine force and had abilities that felt like the future. However, they had not done anything effectively. No one from either submarine fired a shot in anger. When fighting stopped, the attack on Ulithi Atoll that was supposed to happen was called off. There was no strike on the Panama Canal as expected. These amazing ships, not even the thousands of hours of engineering work and limited industry resources that went into Japan's war effort because the Americans had better technology than them, which made their tasks impossible. They couldn't get to their targets without being seen. They couldn't work safely in areas controlled by the United States. They couldn't make it through the Sun Boys, the hunter-killer groups, the radar, the acoustic explosives, and the systematic. American forces had developed systems for fighting submarines. When the U.S. looked at captured Japanese submarines, they found both amazing engineering and serious problems. Weak spots. The ships were not as strong as those made in Germany or the United States, which limited safe depth for swimming. Sonar made it easy to find the submarines. They're big. The ship's shape and size made acoustic signals that American sonar operators could pick out from miles away. They didn't have radar until almost the end of the war. They didn't have anything like American FM sonar to look for mines. Their defenses against planes weren't strong enough to stop American planes that were hunting them with more and more success. Most importantly, Japanese subs didn't have the built-in fire control technology that made American submarines so dangerous. Target data computers on American submarines instantly figured out the best ways to fire, accounting for target course, speed, range, and the properties of the torpedo. Japanese submarines did their maths by hand, which took longer, was more likely to be wrong, and put the submarines at risk. More danger when an attack is coming. The gap in technology wasn't small. It was deep and widespread, affecting every part of submarine activities. The emotional cost of this lack of technology was shocking. 130 submarines were lost by Japan in the war, which is about twice the number of American submarines that were lost. Japan had 70 submarines in December 1941, plus the ones that were built during the war. Most of them were sunk by American anti-submarine troops using the Japan's submariners were afraid of these advances. Sound, radar, and air. They use attack, depth charges, and planned hunter-killer tactics. About 10,000 Japanese submariners died during the war, which is more than 70% of all those who fought. At first, submarine service was seen as a noble and honorable job. But by the end of the war, it was seen as a death sentence. That's it. Young guys who were sent to work in submarines knew they probably wouldn't make it. Families were sad when their kids left for submarine training because they knew the odds. The submarine from Japan force, which went into the war with pride and confidence, came home as a broken arm of a beaten navy. Survivors were discouraged, and the technology they had was so bad that it took away all of their abilities. The way Japanese submariners changed mentally was similar to what German PSWs went through in America, but went in a different direction, where German inmates saw firsthand the wealth and abundance of the United States. Japanese submariners learnt about how much better American technology was by fighting Americans at sea. Both. Through different pieces of evidence, both groups came to the same opinion. Japan and Germany had pushed countries whose the Axis forces couldn't match their industrial and technological strengths. For Japanese submariners who gave up in August 1945, which showed that the United States was better, overpowering, and impossible to deny. They were taken on American submarines and shown new technology that they had never seen before. They visited American naval bases and saw how things were made, which showed why American forces never. It looked like they were short on something. They saw the sauna boys who had been looking for their friends. They looked at the FM sonar that made it possible for American submarines to get through minefields. They looked at the radar systems that helped the U.S. eyes of submarines that are too far away to see. They were in charge of the sound torpedoes that had sunk a lot of Japanese submarines. Taken by Lieutenant Commander Nambu. After giving up I at 401, he was taken on a tour of the USS Sagandu by Lieutenant Commander Stephen L. Johnson, an American submarine. Boo-boo examined Sagundo's radar, her sonar systems, her fire control computer, her torpedo loading mechanisms. Everything was more advanced than equivalent Japanese systems. Read more. Importantly, everything worked reliably. Equipment didn't break down. Systems functioned as designed. American submariners operated their boat with casual confidence that came from knowing their technology was superior and their support was guaranteed. Johnson's crew had survived 9 war patrols, sunk Japanese vessels, evaded enemy anti-submarine forces, and expected to survive the war. Japanese submariners had no equivalent confidence. They operated knowing American technology could find them, track them, kill them. The psychological burden was immense. Nambu later told interrogators that the moment he understood Japan had lost wasn't when he heard of Hiroshima or Nagasaki, but months earlier when he monitored American radio traffic and heard the casual efficiency with which American forces coordinated operations across thousands of miles of ocean. The sheer scale of American operations, the abundance of resources mentioned in routine communications, the technological sophistication implied in everyday procedures, all pointed to capabilities Japan simply couldn't match. The evidence continued to accumulate during the months after surrender. Japanese submariners were brought to American bases in Japan, to Kasibo, where captured submarines were studied, to Tokyo Bay, where surrender ceremonies occurred with American submarines prominently displayed. Vice Admiral Charles A. Lockwood, commander of Submarine Force Pacific, made a point of having his flag hoisted aboard the 400 and I-41 during the surrender ceremony on September 2, 1945, aboard USS Missouri. The symbolism was clear. American submarines had defeated Japanese submarines through technological and industrial superiority. When I-400 and I-41 were taken to Hawaii for detailed examination by American naval engineers, Japanese crew members accompanied them as technical advisors. They watched American engineers disassemble their boats methodically, photographing every component, measuring every dimension, documenting every system. The Americans were thorough, professional, and impressed by some aspects of Japanese engineering. But they were not intimidated. American engineers had seen these submarines and understood them. They had defeated them, not through superior seamanship, but through superior technology deployed with overwhelming industrial capacity. The final revelation came when I-400, I-4001, and other captured Japanese submarines were taken to sea off Hawaii and deliberately sunk as target ships in mid-1946. The decision was driven partly by Soviet demands to examine the submarines. American forces refused to let Soviet engineers study Japanese submarine technology, so they destroyed it. But the symbolism resonated with Japanese submariners who learned of the decision. Their finest submarines, vessels that represented Japan's technological apex, vessels that could carry aircraft across the Pacific and strike American cities, were destroyed casually by forces that no longer needed them for study. American submarine technology had advanced beyond anything Japanese boats could teach. The vessels that had once represented Japanese naval power were reduced to target practice, their destruction barely noted in American records. For Japanese submariners, the message was clear. Japan had built impressive submarines, but America had built technology that made them obsolete. The ocean had never truly been Japan's. It had simply taken time for American technological and industrial superiority to manifest fully. The lessons learned by Japanese submariners spread through post-war Japan as survivors returned home and shared their experiences. Many wrote memoirs describing their shock at American technological capabilities. Others gave lectures to Japanese self-defense force personnel about the importance of technological parity in modern warfare. The submarine veterans associations that formed in the 1950s and 1960s focused heavily on understanding what had gone wrong. Why? Japan's submarine force had achieved so little despite impressive engineering. The conclusions were unanimous. Technological inferiority, industrial weakness, and strategic misuse had doomed Japanese submarines from the start. No amount of courage, skill, or determination could overcome the fundamental asymmetry in capabilities. American submarines operated with technological advantages at every level: detection, fire control, communication, navigation, and logistics. Japanese submarines, regardless of how well designed or skillfully operated, were fighting from positions of permanent disadvantage. The submariners who learned this lesson carried it into Japan's post-war reconstruction, influencing industrial policy, technological development, and military planning for decades. The economic miracle that transformed Japan in the 1950s and 1960s was partly informed by lessons learned during the war. Japanese industry focused on technological excellence, quality, control, and competitive advantage rather than size or grandeur. The I-400 submarines had been impressive but ineffective. Post-war Japan built smaller, more reliable, more technologically advanced products. The emphasis shifted from creating impressive individual achievements to building integrated systems that worked reliably. Sony, Toyota, Honda, and other Japanese companies that became global leaders learned from military failures during the war. They understood that technological superiority required not just good ideas, but complete systems, reliable production, quality assurance, and continuous improvement. Former Japanese naval officers, including submarine veterans, took positions in these companies and influenced their development. The lessons of American technological superiority during the war shaped post-war Japanese industrial philosophy. The transformation was complete when Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force submarines began incorporating American technology in the 1960s and 1970s. Japanese submariners trained with American instructors, learned American tactics, used American sonar systems, and operated boats designed with American assistance. The former enemies became allies, united by recognition that technological excellence and industrial capacity determined outcomes in modern warfare. For Japanese submariners who had experienced the war, this transformation vindicated their post-war assessment. Japan needed to match American technological capabilities, not just admire them from a position of inferiority. By the 1980s, Japan's submarines were among the world's finest, incorporating lessons learned through painful defeat. The circle was complete. The submariners, who had been hunted by American sonar, now built submarines using equivalent technology, having learned through defeat what victory had taught their former enemies. The recordings of I-52's destruction, preserved on wire spools in American archives, remain as testimony to technological revolution in warfare. Modern analysis of those recordings by Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory confirmed that acoustic homing torpedoes guided by sounds transmitted through sonobuoys destroyed I-52 conclusively. The technology that killed Commander Kumo and his crew in June 1944 represented capabilities Japan never matched throughout the war. Those same capabilities refined and improved became standard in modern navies worldwide. Sonar, radar, acoustic torpedoes all evolved from technologies that shocked Japanese submariners in 1944 and 1945. The story of Japanese submarine crews realizing the ocean was no longer theirs is ultimately a story about technological change in warfare. Superior technology deployed with industrial capacity trumped courage, skill, and determination. Japanese submariners were not cowards. They were not incompetent. They were operating with inadequate technology against forces possessing decisive advantages. The psychological journey from confidence to recognition of defeat paralleled the experience of German PS. In America, though the context differed, both groups encountered American capabilities they couldn't explain, couldn't counter, and eventually couldn't deny. Both groups returned to their homelands carrying lessons about technological and industrial competition that shaped post-war development. Both groups influenced Reconstruction by emphasizing the importance of matching American capabilities rather than simply admiring or resenting them. The ocean that Japanese submariners once prowled with confidence became an American domain through technology and industry. Sonar, buoys floating on the surface, transmitted sounds from below. Radar swept the horizon beyond visual range. Acoustic torpedoes hunted submarines autonomously. Hunter-killer groups coordinated aircraft and surface vessels into integrated systems that eliminated submarines systematically. The transformation was complete by mid-1945, leaving Japanese submarines with nowhere to hide, no safe harbor, no hope of survival. When the 9 American submarines of Operation Barney emerged from the Sea of Japan through La Perouse Strait in late June 1945, having sunk 28 Japanese ships in supposedly impregnable waters, the psychological defeat of Japanese naval forces was complete. If American submarines could penetrate the most heavily defended waters using technology to navigate through minefields, then Japanese naval supremacy was finished. The ocean belonged to those who controlled the technology. Japanese submariners understood this lesson viscerally. They had been hunted, tracked, and killed by technologies they couldn't see and couldn't counter. Those who survived carried the knowledge that Japan's defeat was inevitable once American industrial and technological superiority manifested fully. The ocean was never truly Japan's. It had only taken time for reality to assert itself. American sonar buoys, radar systems, acoustic torpedoes, and industrial capacity had transformed submarine warfare. Japanese submariners, regardless of their skill or courage, were operating in an environment where the enemy possessed decisive technological advantages. The realization came gradually through accumulated encounters, close escapes, and reports from other submarines. By 1945, it was universal among survivors. The ocean was no longer theirs. It belonged to the nation that built the technology to control it. America had won the undersea war not through superior seamanship, but through superior science, engineering, and industrial capacity. The legacy endures in modern naval warfare. Sonar remains fundamental to submarine operations. Acoustic torpedoes are standard weapons. Sonar buoys vastly improved from 1944 versions patrol oceans worldwide, dropped from aircraft and ships. The technological revolution that shocked Japanese submariners in 1944 continues, evolving with modern submarines using capabilities that would astound both American and Japanese forces from World War II. But the fundamental lesson remains unchanged. Technological superiority backed by industrial capacity determines outcomes in modern warfare. Japanese submariners learned this lesson through defeat. They carried it into post-war Reconstruction. They influenced Japanese industrial development and military planning for generations. The submarines that once represented Japanese naval power now rest as museum pieces or lie on ocean floors, monuments to engineering skill rendered obsolete by superior technology. The crews who operated them learned lessons that shaped nations, lessons about the importance of technological competition in determining which nations prosper and which fail. The story of Japanese submarine crews intercepting American sonar buoys and realizing the ocean was no longer theirs stands as testament to technological change in warfare. From confidence to recognition of defeat, from presumed superiority to acknowledgement of inferiority, the journey transformed not just individuals but influenced nations. The ocean changed hands, not through surface battles, but through invisible technologies floating on waves, listening beneath them, transmitting data to forces that hunted with scientific precision. Commander Uno. Kameo and the thousands of Japanese submariners who died during the war were defeated by an industrial and technological system they couldn't comprehend until too late. Those who survived carried knowledge that shaped post-war Japan and influenced global naval development for decades. The ocean belonged to those who controlled the technology to master it. That lesson, learned painfully by Japanese submariners between 1941 and 1945, remains relevant in modern naval warfare and technological competition today.